Being dangerous in any time, but especially now, means being willing to speak up even when it's not popular, to speak out when there's an injustice you're experiencing or witnessing, and to stand up for people who are not being represented. And then probably the most dangerous thing women could do, show up. Show up for each other. Show up for the world. And when we do that, change always follows.
Welcome to HarmonyTALK, a platform for dreamers who think big and follow through, sometimes against great odds. Our guest today is Pat Mitchell, a media executive who has been at the forefront of almost, if not all, women's movements in the last 50 years. Pat was the first woman president and CEO of PBS, the public broadcasting system, and of CNN Productions. She founded TED Women, an offshoot of TED Talks, now evolving to TED Next. In 2010, she was the host of her own daytime TV talk show. She's an Emmy Award-winning producer and author of a memoir called Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. Pat is also the mother of 6 and the grandmother of 14. And it all started on a cotton farm in Georgia. This podcast is brought to you by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business and an advocate for dreamers and doers from all walks of life. I'm your host, Lisa Champeau. Pat joins us from her home office in Georgia. Thank you, Pat, and welcome.
Thank you.
This is a show about dreamers, people who follow their passion, the successes, the failures, the risks. So if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to start at the beginning. You kind of spent a lot of time in your youth on a cotton and peanut farm. And as I understand it, you had a house that had no plumbing or electricity. Somehow you went from there to being a national media firebrand. So tell us how those humble beginnings, did they play any part in your journey?
Well, indeed, all our beginnings play a part, right? I think we don't spend a lot of time reflecting on it, just how much. But that was my grandparents' home, Lisa. My dad was in the Army, as were a lot of fathers during those 40s. And so I was being raised by my grandparents for the first 5 years. And they did, in fact, have a small cotton and peanut farm. So I learned how to pick cotton and string tobacco and all those things that are fortunately out of my life now. My grandmother was a big influence. I think I hear that from so many people. Looking back now, I realize how her funny little sayings kind of framed my pathway forward. She would always tell me I could do anything I wanted to do. I was as good at everything as my brother or my nieces or my cousins. And she encouraged me never to think of failure as the end of the story. When I would fall, which I did often as a child, she would pick me up and say, well, at least falling on your face, honey, is a step forward. And that resonated with me even as a very young girl, because it turned out to be the case that when things didn't work out really well, it would end up moving me towards something even better and more challenging. So those early interactions with our families, and especially grandmothers, it seems, have real impact. Something I think about a lot now as a grandmother myself.
Right. Well, of course, in the beginning, you took a kind of a traditional path. You went to college, you got a master's degree, or even 2. You taught at 2 colleges, but then somehow you kind of took a leap and you went to New York to work for Look magazine, but Look magazine folded in 9 months. And there you were. I believe you were a divorced single mother at that time of 1 son. And what did you do? Why did you didn't turn back? You somehow managed to stick it out and take that leap.
Well, that's where I think I thought of my grandmother's advice, because my mother's advice was come back home, get another teaching job, move back to the small town where they now lived. But something inside of me kept thinking, no, move forward, move forward. So I moved north to New York after teaching. And as you say, then hit the really first big risk, which was unemployment in New York City with no training other than teaching and a few months at a magazine. But fortunately, during those magazine time, I had written a story that had news and relevance for the time. And that helped me get an appointment with the news director of NBC television. And with encouragement from friends, I sat outside his office all day until he finally did see me. And he looked at the story and said, "Well, you have promise here. How about writing for television?" And that's how the journey began to find the right way to do that, since I had no experience or knowledge of what the television business was. But the timing was right. They were looking for women and minorities, as they were referred to at the time, because of government regulations, actually. So eventually I found the right television job, and a whole new pathway and career opportunities opened up after that.
Well, you certainly did sort of climb the ladder, as they say, in television, and you ended up on air. And I think you even had the first interview with Fidel Castro where he talked about nuclear warheads. So you definitely established yourself. But then, as I understand it, you did take another risk. You left what some would consider a kind of a cushy job to start your own production company. And you produced a show, correct? I mean, what,
Yes, yes,
that's a leap.
absolutely. Well, Lisa, the most important part of that story for me, of those early days in television, was recognizing what power media had, and the power that I had as one of the few women inside the industry. And for me, it just didn't make sense to keep doing things the way they were being done, which in those days meant no women's programming, practically no women's stories, except in the daytime soap operas, and a kind of dismissal of the women audience. So I began very early to think, how can I use this power inside to affect the impact of media outside, recognizing even then the power of media in shaping our ideas and opinions. So that really was the reason I left NBC, is that I kept pushing for women's stories and kept being rejected or turned down or mansplained about how women wouldn't watch such a story.
And is
And
that
that
kind of where your focus on women sort of generated at
it
that
had
time?
started early. And again, I'm not quite sure why, except that I think growing up as a girl in the South in the 50s, where everything was pretty restricted by the expectations for what your life could be, that just seemed so unjust to me, as did the treatment of my Black friends and neighbors. And so those two injustices came into focus for me when I was in college, coming up political age. The civil rights movement, which I joined enthusiastically, the women's movement, which I also joined enthusiastically. Those movements had real impact on me and framed my worldview of what I could do in the world.
It's interesting because you were fairly lucky. I mean, you managed to get a good job and you did well, and then you turned around to use it to help other people. Was there any, like, one moment or one person's experience where you said, "Wow, there's a real disparity here. I'm going to focus on this"?
I can't name you one specific instance, but I could probably name you many
Yeah,
if I could, if we
sure.
had a lot of time.
Well, you have a
Because,
lot of great stories. I love your blog.
oh, thank you for that. But there were many times, both for me personally, when I felt the difference in what was possible for me as a woman, and many times when I observed it in other women's lives. That did the fight to do what I could do it in whatever small way that might be, to elevate the reality of injustice, and to do what I could to tell the stories of those who were addressing the injustices. That that became a real central touchstone, actually, of all my work, I think.
And I think your work to date. Now, you went on to join PBS. Now, that wasn't necessarily focused on women. It was more of a general job. What led you to do that?
that left out many years in between a focus on women. The Woman to Woman show was the first ever owned and produced by a women owned production company. And it was just, it was, as the network described it, just ordinary women sitting around talking about their lives. And yet, those ordinary women, meaning not famous, not book authors, not had so much to say to each other. So that was a revolution for the what I wanted to do with media, but also I think for the television world in general. And I only left it because I had the offer to come back and work at CNN. And CNN at the time was clearly transforming not only the media landscape, but people's lives. So that opportunity brought me back to Atlanta and to work for this amazing visionary, Ted Turner, who gave me this huge budget and said, make documentaries that are about changing the world, that are about addressing injustice, and about telling untold stories. How lucky could anyone get? I mean, I used to actually ask him, I can't believe you pay me to do this work, because it was so much the work I had dreamed of and worked towards. So while it wasn't only about women, it started from a woman's story because I convinced him to tell the history of women in America, which had never been told and wasn't in any history books at the time. And that was the first project we did together. But when he sold the company to Time Warner, I could see the change was coming and the lack of support for the kind of work that I wanted to do. And the opportunity at PBS presented itself to have, again, a larger footprint, television stations that reached nearly every American, and to be a part of that system of a media company not driven by profits. Well, that again was just such a big opportunity. So that was the move then to PBS.
But you went back again to your women focus with the TED Women.
Yes, and connected women leaders. TED Women came first, and again, these ideas grew out of experience, as most of our work does, and experiencing the TED conferences and seeing the impact again of TED Talks. It felt to me unfair and unjust that less than 7% of the speakers at that time were women. So when I approached the owner of TED, the founder of TED, Chris Anderson, and asked why, his answer was one I had heard before in television from media executives and news executives saying, well, we just can't find those women's stories, or we just can't find a woman rocket scientist. And I said, well, I can. I brought him 10 rocket scientists for the next TED conference. And he said, okay, let's do one that features mostly women talks. There were never only women on the stage at TED Women, but mostly. And the good news is that changed the percentage, or more importantly than the numbers, that changed the opportunities for more women to access the power of the TED Talk and the media reach that it had.
What was the biggest hurdle, you think, in getting your points across?
I didn't really face the question of, is this the right thing to do? I don't think I heard that question so much as questioning the viability. Would people really care? Or would there be an audience for it? The question around TED Women was, will the TED community show up and support it? So there were usually questions about, is there a motive? Is there an appetite? Is there a motivation? Is there a need for these untold stories?
And
Or
what was
for,
your biggest argument? In other words, yes, there's a need. Yes, there's an audience.
well, the facts are pretty clear.
As a woman, I understand.
Sometimes those facts aren't understood, but I mean, the fact that there was only 7%, and I could prove that, of the TED Talks at the time. Now, by the way, it's nearly half and sometimes more, because guess what? Women's TED Talks do as well and sometimes better than men's TED Talks. But this was never a matter of saying we should do this because it's better. It was a matter of saying we should do these stories and tell these stories and highlight these ideas because they matter. And that's a different argument than arguing only from the point of is unjust. Of course, it's unjust. But of course, it also matters in the world to have as much, as many different voices and stories represented. So that was usually my response back was, yes, I can prove to you this is not right the way it's working. But more importantly, let me show you that it matters and that people care and they'll show up for those stories and those ideas. And they did.
Well, you've had many award-winning productions, including, of course, Ted Women, but I think you did some documentaries on refugees in Georgia and Holocaust survivors, and you've been inducted into the Broadcasting Cable TV Hall of Fame. You've been chair of the Sundance Institute, and you're still involved with the Sundance Institute. In fact, you recently just wrote a beautiful tribute to Robert Redford. And now you're involved in Project Dandelion, which aims to rid the world of climate injustice against women. We'll get to that in a moment, but I just wanted to ask you, out of all those things I just mentioned, which ones stand out the most to you and were the most fulfilling in terms of your mission? All of
Mm,
them, right?
of course.
I
you know,
know it's like asking who your favorite child is. I can't ask that question.
exactly. That's exactly what I think. I could never say that, and I can't say that, but I am struck by there is a thread, that connects all of it. So, I always react and respond most quickly to what I'm doing now. I am somebody who lives very much in the present. I don't live in the past. I'm really thrilled and when I get to think about work that I've done in the past, that gives me great pleasure. But I don't dwell on that. I'm always thinking, what is next? And so I'd have to say Project Dandelion, Lisa, because in fact, if we don't keep this planet habitable for our children, grandchildren, then nothing else really matters. That was the argument Mary Robinson gave me, by the way, in enlisting me to co-found Project Dandelion with her was
Now, she's the
exactly
former
that.
president of Ireland, isn't she? Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
so this is a global initiative. Just for our audience's sake, why don't you just explain a little bit about what Project Dandelion is? I know I said climate injustice, but that's a very broad topic.
Mhm. Once again, in looking at climate and the nature crisis, we discovered there was an unjust and unfair impact of climate and the changes in our weather on women and girls. More women and girls lost their lives in climate catastrophes. They're on the front lines, but they're also on the front lines solving for the problem. So Project Dandelion wanted to elevate those women and their leadership on the front lines. And by doing that, engage more people in finding solutions, however personal or in your family or in your community, but getting involved. So, our ultimate goal, as Mary and my co founders, Rhonda Carnegie and Hafsat Abiola, what we said from the beginning was there are 2 billion women sitting on the sidelines still. And the world, our planet, our habitable future is at risk. So join us, get engaged, do something, get active, and inspiring them by telling the stories of women that we've had the privilege to meet all over the world who are doing this. So it began with the injustice. That was the motivation of it just can't be right, the disproportionate negative impact on women and girls. And then it led to let's just get women then to help us solve the problem. Men too, of course, but elevating in particular the need for women's leadership to lead us to that more climate just future.
Well, could you possibly just maybe give us a story of, say, maybe a small farmholder in, I don't know, Ghana or someplace who was affected by this?
Well, one we're working on right now, or working with, I should say, in Ethiopia. a group of smallholder women farmers. And by the way, smallholder women farmers feed 85% of the world's medium to small countries. So there's nothing small about what they do. I'm on a campaign to change smallholder farmers. I don't know what we got. I prefer to call them entrepreneurs. And these women indicate that because they were having real issues having to do with the droughts that are, again, part of the climate changes that are affecting people everywhere in the world. And they noticed the irrigation system was really not delivering water to their small holdings in this part of Ethiopia. But rather than sitting around and waiting for somebody to solve the problem or the government to give them money or some philanthropist to come in, they got together and redesigned the irrigation system and rebuilt it with their own hands so that not only did it start to deliver the necessary water to their small farms, but it also made the water available throughout the whole region in Ethiopia. So for us then, the our work, our role was tell that story. And by telling that story, which we did in a social media campaign, we unlocked some new financing support for them. So that the idea, which had scale and which could be imported to other places, what they did, they got some financing and support to be able to do that. So
That's
that's
amazing. So it's
that's
the
how we
connecting. It's
work.
the connecting.
Yeah, we're not the doers. We're not the people building the irrigation systems or even asking for money for that. We're the people who are telling the stories of the women who are doing it. And by doing that, yes, hopefully bringing in more support, much needed. Less than 1% of all philanthropic funding for climate and nature goes to women and women led solutions. So shifting that has been a real goal. And then by telling these stories, get a lot more women and men engaged in solving what is our biggest challenge of our time and our generation.
Well, it's a very big challenge, particularly now. There have been a lot of changes, as you know, particularly in the US regarding climate. How do you respond to that?
Well, we're
For
asked that
example, the
question.
yeah, I don't want to get too political,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's a fight.
it is. And we are often asked that question as we travel to these frontline solutionists, as I like to call them. They all point to, well, what about the U.S.? And because recognizing the importance of our role in the world as a leader, I think that the momentum behind the shift to renewable energies, the momentum behind the elevation of the crisis, I don't think that can be stopped. I can get a little depressed and down about, our withdrawal from treaties and commitment to very real important standards. But I can also see around the world that the shift is happening anyway. People are waking up and realizing that we can't continue to exploit our natural resources and have a habitable place. So, I'm encouraged that it will be on the ground with the work that's being done. And part of the reason I can feel that is because of what we're seeing all over the world. And then I hope through my writing about it and talking about it with you, reach more people and engage them too.
Yes, I was just wondering if your strategy had changed somewhat, but it sounds as if you've just become more invigorated, more focused on how you do what you do. And I know you have 7 demands. And I do believe the very first one is stop government subsidizing fuel companies. So it's your demands are clearly important. It's just they're monumental. And
But Lisa, let's think about that for a moment because we're a long way from getting off fossil fuel, and especially in this country at the moment. But at the same time, the world has moved on without us and are convening the first ever fossil fuel proliferation treaty conference. in Colombia. So other countries, 29 other countries, are getting together and going, well, we're just going to do it anyway, and are looking at how they can negotiate the end of subsidizing fossil fuel and of using it and shifting away from it to renewables. So I have to believe that we're not going to let this planet die on our watch. How are we going to look at our children and grandchildren and say, when they ask, well, where were you when everything was in such peril and at such risk? I want to be able to say, I was there. I was doing what I could do.
This takes us to your memoir in a way, Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. Can you define dangerous for us? Because I think you're a dangerous woman. It's not
I didn't,
necessarily someone with a weapon.
yeah, I didn't want that to be the title of the book because of exactly that. Dangerous has, real negative implications, and especially for the women that I've spent a lot of time working with who are living with danger every single day, real physical danger. But my editor thought, well, that'll get people to read it, Pat, perhaps. And perhaps it does, although it led to it being banned in Kenya, by the way, because I think they thought I was a dangerous woman with a weapon. What I define dangerous as, and that I try and explain in the book, is that being dangerous in any time, but especially now, means being willing to speak up, even when it's not popular, to speak out when there's an injustice you're experiencing or witnessing, and to stand up for people who are not being represented, voices that are not in the decision making rooms. They need us to speak up and stand up for them. And then, probably the most dangerous thing women could do: show up. Show up for each other. Show up for the world. Show up for our communities. Um, and when we do that, change always follows.
Well, I know on your TED talk, when you talked about the book, you did say you can't take risks being on the sidelines. Get in there, get into the fight. So let's say that you are, a woman living far from a big city where protests and so on happen, and you work full time and you have a family, but you want to be a part, you want to take that risk. What's some advice that you would give that woman?
That's such a good question. And I do encounter women who ask that question often. What can I do? And it of course differs depending on their circumstances, but I always seem to think there is something we can do in our own lives. And usually in a conversation, you'll find that. You'll find the community group, or you'll find the change they can make in some personal um, behavior or personal habit. There are all kinds of things in our personal lives that seem small, but they add up. And I'm trying to think of a good example to share. One might be one I just witnessed in India, where a woman was telling me the story of taking out a loan and buying an e-scooter, because that e-scooter took her off contributing to the horrible pollution throughout the country, but that everyone laughed at her and questioned her. Children questioned her about the investment. There was all kinds of pressures against it, and she doesn't have a big, opportunity to have impact. But she felt that every time she got on that e-scooter and went around the neighborhood, I went on her errands, um, she was making a difference. So I think of her now at that point, but I think every one of us, and I was in sort of in that same way. And when Mary asked me to get involved in Project Dandelion, my first reaction was, Mary, climate's your thing. I'm going to keep working on women's representation, because I think that's the game changer. And, she just looked at me and she said, how can you separate one from the other? They are all interconnected. All of these crises are. Every single one of them that is an injustice in the world is interconnected. So that's why I got off the sidelines when it came to climate and joined this movement.
Project Dandelion, and the name comes from, perhaps you can tell us where the name comes from, the dandelion.
The dandelion. You know how the pink ribbon revolutionized the way people thought about breast cancer? Because every movement really needs a symbol so that when people see it, it makes them reflect on something. When I see the pink ribbon, I reflect on the need to contribute to money for research on breast cancer. And when we hope people see the dandelion pin, they think that I can be a little bit more like the dandelion because all of us are a part of nature. And in nature, the dandelion is the only plant that grows on all 7 continents. So it's climate resilient. It's the only planet that spreads itself by its seeds in the wind. So that's what we want to do, spread climate justice and the idea we can live in a climate just world. And it's healing. Every single part of this plant can be eaten or taken in tea or coffee even. I have dandelion coffee now. So it's healing, it's regenerative and regenerating itself, it's resilient, it's all the things that we need to be now in this world where there's so many challenges. But all of them, like the dandelion, can come up through the cracks as it does. And also, you can find out very quickly you can't get rid of it. And that's also an important part of our um, effort to alert everyone and get everyone more active and finding solutions to all these crises and challenges.
I'm going to ask kind of a tough question. You've been on the march, so to speak, for decades for women. You've seen a lot of progress, haven't you?
Yes, but in the last few years, I've seen a lot of backward movement
Mm,
too.
mm, mm.
Is that the question?
I guess
Is it
that's the
going
question, but
backward?
I don't want to put any cracks in your wonderful sense of hope, because you do have hope.
Oh, well, hope is a form of action, as my friend Gloria Steinem says. And it is necessary. I don't know how you do the work every day towards building something if you're not hopeful that it will in some way create positive change. So I have to remain hopeful. I am really saddened by how much has been pushed back. I was especially distressed on the reproductive freedom side after being on the front lines of the Roe versus Wade legislation and what was so needed for women to give us the freedom to make decisions about our own bodies. Seeing that roll back has been really hard. Um, so there are many of those battles that seem to be lost, but I don't think they're lost. I have to believe they're temporarily um, being pushed back, and that women will not let this stand. That we will rise up and resist the movement to push us back into the background. And that does feel like there's a movement underway to do that. Even taking away voting rights and freedom of reproductive decisions rights. And, we could go through the list. There's a lot being threatened and even lost.
And you
But
talked about leaving the world, as you said, a better place for your children. And you know, let's talk for a second about your family. We only have a few minutes left, and I don't want to leave that out. How did you do all that you did and still manage to have a family of 6? I mean, you must have a wonderful husband as well, Scott.
I, I do, but Lisa, it's a very important fact here. I did not bear these children. So if I'd had the time that it takes to uh, go through a pregnancy and have a child and raise those would not have been possible. I did that with one on my own. And every single mother in the world knows how hard that is. But the other 5 came to me through marriage. One of them young enough that I had the chance to be a part of his early nurturing. And some of them older and well established in the wonderful ways that they would go forward because they're all exceptional children. So I never call them stepchildren or whatever other term there is for that, because they're family. They are mine.
Well, exactly. They're still family, even if, I mean, and family requires,
Definitely.
you show up for family too. It might
Well,
be
I do,
right, a
as much
birthday
as
party
possible.
or, yeah.
But my family also understands that. The grandchildren call me Gigi, and they're always like, "Well, where's Gigi now?" So I think I'm modeling for them. That's my intention anyway, to model for them what it means to be active and to be giving back and to be showing up at every age in your life.
Well, that sounds terrific. It sounds too like your husband is very supportive,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
the kid must be supportive too. Yeah,
My husband recently got profiled in the Dandelion Digest, which is our monthly, our weekly newsletter on climate, and I didn't even know it. The editors went to him because he's a truly inspiring environmentalist who has done such great work on resource management. So he not only is very much committed to the same work, so we share that, but he's also 100% supportive of everything I do. And it's, I just feel incredibly privileged. I didn't have that for a lot of my life because we didn't marry until much later in life. So I feel among the luckiest of women, actually, to have found a partnership that is nurturing and supportive.
that's terrific. We only have a few minutes left. So, do you have any parting words, any advice for, say, young women who are involved in movements and keeping the hope alive?
I've been trying to think of something, pithy and easy to remember that, because we all think, we're all asked, as I'm sure you are too, for how did you get to be where you are? What is the advice you would give me to have the career? And it's just so different now for each of our paths, but also in terms of the times we're living in. Um, and the only I just keep coming back to those same things. Look for opportunities where your voice can make a difference. Look for opportunities where you can show up and be a support of someone else, and just never give up. Never look at risk as if it's a path to failure, but to look at risk as if it's a path to moving forward. That's the best I can do. I could quote many of my wonderful, inspiring authors. One of them that I think of, though, frequently is Mary Oliver, who says, has that great line in her poem, which she says, "So tell me, what will you do with your wild and wondrous life?" And so I still think of that every day. What will I do today with my this gift of a wild and wondrous life?
Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot, and we really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us, Pat. Thank you for sharing your life story and your hopes for the road ahead. And to our audience, if you want to know more about Pat, visit patmitchellmedia.com, which also includes, I believe, in your newsletter, lists of ways you can get involved, groups, and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
many of which might be in your own community. This podcast has been brought to you by AM Sky, or a family insurance business that encourages people to realize their passions, dream large, and make it happen. Visit HarmonyTALKpodcast.com for more stories from dreamers and doers. Thanks for listening, and thank you again, Pat. Talk to you all next time.